I'm Dream Queen. You're in the cab with me. Thank you so much for rolling. I have Helen McCloskey back in the studio. Helen, lifelong political activist, legislative staff member for California Congressman Paul Pete McCloskey Jr., also his lovely doting wife.
Was.
That's right. Did a lot of living together, you two. And an Arab American community organizer in your days, educator, writer, editor. So, folks, I had Helen on last week, and we just didn't even scratch the surface of all the things that we wanted to discuss within earshot of you lovely souls. So I've invited Helen back by popular demand, especially in the face of local election time here in New Mexico. Just a few things on the ballot that folks want to vote on. So it's just a good time to talk about some things we were discussing off mic about electoral politics, political strategies, and, just government.
Yeah.
Okay. So, Helen, welcome back. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. It's a very cold morning. I think my right foot has yet to defrost.
Well, obviously you didn't do any dancing with the music in the first hour. That would have warmed you up a little bit. Oh, Helen, so what do we have for the people today? Where should we start?
Well, we have an election coming up. And the way the voting thing works is if you're in one state, like I am sometimes here in New Mexico and sometimes in California, and so you can't vote in both states, obviously. And so California doesn't normally have an off-year election, i.e. an odd number year like 2025. And I hadn't realized that New Mexico does, because you have the mayoral elections for the people who live in the city of Santa Fe. We, of course, here in Madrid are in the unincorporated part of the county. Our town isn't incorporated, so we, I guess, because I'm not voting this time since I voted in a special election in California. I mailed in my ballot last week, so I can't vote here. But it appears that there are some county issues that are on the ballot. I haven't looked at the New Mexico ballot, but many of these local measures, talk about close races. This is where your vote matters. And they're important things. They're sometimes school board things and, county commissioners and people that sort of directly affect your life. So it's a good time to study the ballot. I'm always struck by how people might spend, half an hour picking out a piece of clothing at Ross, but they won't spend half an hour looking at the ballot. Mm-hmm. And it's a matter of priorities.
Yes, it really is. And a lot of folks think their vote doesn't matter. So we touched on that a little bit last week. I'd also like to know if you can share, you were saying that California, you don't normally have an off-year election, but you voted this time on something.
Yeah, so it's a little bit complicated. In California, the congressional districts used to be drawn by the state legislature. And the state legislature is overwhelmingly Democratic in California, and there was feelings that the redistricting was not done fairly typically. And I can attest to that because Pete was a Republican, a liberal Republican, and they gerrymandered his district so it looked like a salamander, and there was a big joke about that. So Pete and I actually worked on an initiative to get to on the ballot so the voters could decide whether they wanted to have redistricting continued by being drawn up by the state assembly or to an independent commission. And the people voted overwhelmingly to have it go to the independent commission, which is what we wanted. So the lines were less partisan. They made more sense in terms of communities not being broken up the way redistricting often will do. And so this year, because of what's going on all over the country with the Republicans redistricting and trying to cut out communities of color, gay areas. They're trying to break up communities so that they lose their influence within a district. And Governor Newsom decided that we had to fight fire with fire and put together an initiative to bring the redistricting of congressional districts in California back to the state assembly and Senate, so they can gerrymander the hell out of the state and try and get rid of some Republicans. And it's a very interesting dilemma for me in a way, because I worked for many years to take it away from the political establishment in the state legislature and bring the redistricting to an independent commission. But I happen to agree with him. We have to fight fire with fire. Texas is redistricting itself so thoroughly that there's going to be more seats, and there'll be Republican seats. And they're trying to keep the Democrats from retaking the House of Representatives Congress. So these are battles that are being waged in states because each state does its own congressional districts its own way, and you just sometimes have to roll up your sleeves. I mean, Newsom's initiative to change how the districts are done is only for the next two elections, and then it goes back to the independent commission. So I'm voting for it. I did vote for it.
Who's on this independent commission?
I can't remember exactly how the commission is appointed, but it's appointed a fairly decent way, so it's not just the Democrats in the state assembly appointing them or just the governor. There's, I think, someone from a university, and they've kind of got a system where they've got an independent commission. So we'll see how that goes. I mean, it's really important that California do what it can to fight the tide of, I mean, really what's going on, and really why I have such a passion about the importance of voting, is the efforts being put in by the billionaire bros, elite Republican cabal it's extraordinary what the money they're putting in to deny you your vote. You know, they're working really, really hard to create a situation where many, many people will be disenfranchised, even to the point of requiring women to prove that the name on their voter registration is backed up by documents and stuff. So if you're married, you might have to go through hoops if you took on your husband's name. I mean, just absurd, awful stuff. So your vote is so important that billionaires are paying millions to take it away from you.
Yeah. I'm very confused about why we don't have one person, one vote in America, like a popular vote. Has that ever been something that people entertain as politicians? Like the Electoral College, the whole thing kind of confuses me. I don't know. Am I making any sense?
Oh, it's confusing,
a confused American.
No, it's confusing and it's horrible.
Tell me what gerrymandering is.
Okay, so gerrymandering is where, each state makes up, figures out the boundaries of each congressional district, and each congressperson represents roughly 500,000 people. In states like Texas and California, very often the lower level, the state level representatives represent more people than a congressman. It's interesting. But anyway, so each congressional district is roughly about 500,000 people. And the lines of where those congressional boundaries are important. And so in some situations, the state elected officials do it, and others independent commissions. Gerrymandering is when they decide, okay, there's an African-American community in this district, and it's a generally Republican district, but the African-Americans are voting Democrat, and this is a problem for us. And so what they'll do is redo the boundaries to maybe split up that African-American community so it no longer is a voting block within that congressional district. So when you change boundaries, you can mess around with how communities are empowered in an area and sort of break them up and weaken them. Or you can draw a district line to go pick up a little enclave of Democrats or Republicans, whatever you're trying to do. So it's a way of kind of solidifying power to a party, like the party in power can gerrymander the whole state so that they weaken all the minority communities or the ones that they don't like, and they empower the vote of the people that they want to have win. I mean, it's just a crazy thing, but you can see where a line could, like a wall. If you do a wall within the middle of a village and you separate people, it weakens them. And if you take a voting block away from a community that has some influence because they're voting as a community, and you break that community up, you splinter it, you've weakened their vote.
I just don't understand how that's legal. Like, how are we going through this every few years where people have the power to do that?
Well, because you've got to have boundaries somewhere. I mean, each congressional district's got to be a shape and a size, and so the question comes down to how you're going to do it. And that is a state-by-state thing. So some states have a fairer system than other states. Some states are so partisan, they're crooked. It's human beings.
Yeah.
This is the scary thing to me about human beings. One of our strengths is that we're incredibly adaptable. Evolutionarily, we can adapt to incredible calamities and asteroids and fires and whatever. But we're so adaptable that what scares me right now is we're being deadened by the onslaught of tragedies that happen every day, the heartbreaking things we hear. I mean, for me as an environmentalist, seeing the destruction of all the environmental bills that have been passed for decades by this administration and opening up pristine areas in Alaska for oil and gas drilling that other Republican presidents have kept not drilled. It's just devastating. And in that pain that we all feel, I think we get really worn down. But also all the awful things going on, like rounding up immigrants and non-immigrants and whomever and shoving them whoever knows where. We become deadened to these daily things that we have to listen to and hear about in these heartbreaks. And I worry that some of the suppression of free speech is becoming normalized. The Republicans have an amazing machine in terms of legacy media, and that's been going on for a long time. So they have the airwaves much more than other people do. And that comes down to the fact that under Ronald Reagan, the Federal Communications Commission's fairness doctrine, which said if you, Jada, own a radio station and you have, say, Rush Limbaugh on for an hour, then you have to have Rachel Maddow on. But there was a fairness doctrine that was at play on the public radio waves, and as it should be. But under Reagan, that started to get weakened, so the criteria for buying a station was not that you agreed to be fair, but that you had the money to buy the station. That was kind of the bottom line. And then over the years, it got weakened, and it completely died under Barack Obama. So we don't have a fairness doctrine, and people are just hearing what they want to hear, and they get deadened, and my vote doesn't matter. There's a defeatism that comes in. And I'm going to wait for the revolution. Well, what revolution? And how's that going to come about? Mm-hmm. It's like you use the tools that you have, because right now the elite are spending fortunes to take that vote away from you. If it weren't important, they wouldn't be doing that. Mm-hmm. It's like, wake up.
We were talking a little bit off mic last week about Gavin Newsom's strategy. There are some folks that are saying that, we shouldn't go low. When I say we, I just mean anybody who's not a fascist. So I'm not really aligning myself with Democrats, but I am in this sense because, anybody who is a little bit more for human rights than where we are with the GOP. But they're saying, we shouldn't commit the same biased moves that the GOP are doing. And you're fully behind what Newsom is up to right now.
I would say I'm fully behind it reluctantly. I'm looking at the reality on the ground. And we are in an incredibly fierce battle here. And also that piece of legislation to change the redistricting has a sunset clause written into it. So it's not like it's going to destroy the fact that we worked for years to get the commission to do the redistricting. It's going to expire. And it's kind of desperate times call for desperate measures. It's legal. It's not pretty in my book. It's not the way I prefer to have things done, but I understand the need to do it. Because if the Democrats, as flawed as they are, don't take the House back, there's no brake pedal on this absolutely insane government. They have the Senate, the House, and the White House. They have the Supreme Court. I mean, all the cards are stacked against most of our interests. And if we don't take back the House of Representatives, Congress, we are in beyond worse shape than we are now. It will be devastating. I mean, look at right now with the government shutdown and SNAP benefits at risk. And I mean, people are going to really start feeling the pain. Car repossessions have never been higher. 10% of the population is carrying 50% of the consumerism. That 10% elite, wealthy, is what's keeping this economy afloat. The stock market's going through the roof while people are buying groceries on, pay loan things it's just absurd.
Have you been keeping up with the details of the shutdown?
Not really. I mean, technically, structurally, only the president and the Speaker of the House can end the shutdown. And of course, they're blaming it on the Democrats. The Democrats are holding out so that people don't lose Medicaid and insurance under the Obamacare Act. But the Republicans are happy to have this continue. So I'm very concerned. I mean, federal agencies are shut down. The federal workers aren't getting paid. People are really hurting.
Yeah. You sent me a message this morning, which I had sent out to the homies last night, that there was a development. And the story that I took was from Reuters, from Nate Raymond. Trump administration cannot suspend food aid benefits, U.S. judges ruled. And it was basically that two federal judges, District Judge John McConnell in Providence, Rhode Island, and there's a judge in Massachusetts, both said that it was illegal for them to hold these funds back. So we've seen a lot of these injunctions and these blocks and these rulings, and they just go ahead and roll over and do whatever they want anyway.
Exactly.
Because they want to push people to the brink. So where's the legality in this? Do you have any insight on how we can hold basically a rogue administration responsible?
Well, I mean, they have absolutely ignored the rule of law. They are, it's so interesting to me too, because conservatives have always, they've been against things like national health care system because it's quote unquote socialist, which is absurd. That's not the definition of socialism. That's the definition of an intelligent government that cares about its people. I mean, most European democracies have universal health care. That's just a given. They're amazed that we don't. Definition of socialism is when the government starts taking over the means of production. And you see Trump doing that. He's taking, a position in US Steel and a board position in Intel. And you see this incursion of, pushing media companies to give up shows that he doesn't want. And I mean, you start seeing a very inappropriate level of government influence in private corporations, and a lot of them are jumping for it. So, the definition of what socialism, what isn't, are absurd. But as to the legality, I don't think, much of what they've done is not legal, but the Supreme Court is so in their camp that it's hard to see a movement forward. That's why it's so important to take the House of Representatives, because that's the only way we're going to get hearings on some of this stuff. That's the only way we're going to be able to get back some oomph into law-abiding members of Congress. I mean, half of those people are just beyond the pale on the Republican side.
In your experience, have you ever seen a Supreme Court judge be ousted for illegality?
No. Mm-hmm. And I wish they had term limits in the Supreme Court. I mean, the fact that Barack Obama was denied a choice of his person on the Supreme Court. And see, this is where people say, well, the Democrats shouldn't go low like the Republicans. I don't know. At this point, I'm ready to take the gloves off, because that was an outrage that Mitch McConnell prevented Barack Obama from having his choice of a Supreme Court justice. And that was kind of the beginning of the end of the Supreme Court. And there is no number in the Constitution of how many justices you can have. I mean, at this point, I think if the Democrats ever regain power, they ought to pack the court and make it bigger and get more people on there so they dilute this horrible cabal of, they're not even normal conservatives. They're so far out that I think they're destroying the country.
And you have a background as a Republican.
I do.
We talked a little bit about that last week, but let's just tell people where you're coming from really quickly.
Do we have to say that I was once a Republican?
Yes, because, when we sat down here this morning, we talk about how people change and how we don't have to agree on every point in order to vote for someone or be friends with someone. You know what I mean? We tend to label people and things and issues and then go the opposite direction. But how do I say to a person or a family member, like, that's not all bad. All Republicans aren't bad. All Christians aren't bad. Some people say all cops are bad, but but all Republicans aren't bad. I don't know.
Well, I was a Republican because, like most people, you're sort of what your family is. And my parents were Republican. But back in the day, in the days long, long ago, little children, when there were liberal Republicans. It was very common. I mean, I look at a very conservative Republican, Senator Barry Goldwater from Arizona, who wrote the book Conscience of a Conservative that kind of ignited the conservative movement in the 60s and 70s in this country. But he was sane, and he wasn't like what we think of as conservative nowadays. I mean, he was on the board of Planned Parenthood. This was a whole different era. And my mother became a Democrat first, and then my father became a Democrat. This was back in the 90s. And I did as well in the early 2000s because it was clear that the religious right was making such inroads into the party that there was no hope. I mean, I held out for a long time, hoping that keeping the centrists in and the liberals in would keep the party more balanced. But I have to say the conservatives in this country have worked very hard to get where they are. They've encouraged young people to take internships. They've put them into think tanks. They've encouraged a whole culture. And it's paid off for them because they've kind of taken over. Mm-hmm. And they've taken over within a sea of apathy. I think Plato said, I'm paraphrasing because this isn't the exact quote, but basically he said, the price of apathy is being ruled by evil men. Mm-hmm. And there you go. If you're apathetic or you don't get involved. I mean, silence is consent. There is no such thing. This is the thing I come down to. There's no such thing as not voting. If you're not voting, you're basically okaying the status quo if there is, in fact, an alternative. And there are alternatives. And back to your point of people don't need to agree on everything. I mean, you don't agree on everything with your best friend. And you shouldn't expect it out of candidates. You have to look at more, how does the candidate think? I mean, for instance, you could be against abortion because you think it's taking a life, or you could be for abortion because you don't think that it's the government's position to be involved in someone's personal decisions. That doesn't mean you actually like the idea or are indifferent about the idea. You may have strong anti-abortion feelings, but you come out pro-choice because you don't believe government should intrude in the person's life in making a personal decision. So it's really important to kind of go to candidates' forums and kind of try and figure out how are they thinking, because you may agree with the candidate on an issue, but then find out that the way you got to that conclusion was very different. And it's kind of worth knowing where they're coming from generally, because there are hard compromises that have to be made in politics. And so you have to give people some leeway, but you have to have also some sense of where they're coming from overall. And, take some judgment call. And you're not always going to be right. Well, so what?
A good way to find out where people are coming from is tracing the money too, huh?
Yeah.
There's a lot of money in politics that I wish was not involved. I don't, as a person with 15 jobs, I don't really think that our politicians have to have 15 jobs. However, at the same time, I don't think that they should be receiving all of this money and forced to campaign all the time.
It's just ludicrous. There should be public financing of campaign like some democracies have. Limited time period for the campaign, so we're not all listening to this stuff endlessly. And, members of Congress end up having to spend like half of their time, trying to raise money, especially the progressives, because they're generally not taking PAC money. And the unlimited dark money in American politics makes the system just unbelievably skewed. It's so, we are so underrepresented as a result of the amount of money sloshing around, dark money that doesn't have to be disclosed. And, if the Democrats ever take back power in a meaningful way, like both houses and the White House, they have to overturn Citizens United, which was a decision that the Supreme Court made that allowed for dark money. And it's amazing. But even the Democrats, there was a bill here in New Mexico to require lobbyists lobbying in the roundhouse to disclose which bills they were lobbying on. Well, is that too much to ask? Michelle Grisham Lujan vetoed it. So I am not going in the direction of false equivalency of saying the Democrats and the Republicans are equally bad, but they are both flawed. But human beings are flawed. Mm-hmm. Woman up and man up and deal with that and use the tools you have.
Let's just tell for the people listening, what's a PAC? It's a Political Action Committee?
Political Action Committee.
And what do? They
get a lot of money from their rich friends and they throw it at things they care about, either an initiative on the ballot or a candidate, usually candidates. And so the biggest, most powerful lobby in the country, the PAC, is AIPAC, the American Israeli Public Affairs Committee. And that supports candidates in Congress mainly, but some lower level state offices. And their only criteria is you support anything Israel does or wants, no matter who's in power in Israel and no matter what the policy position is, which, talk about absurd. The other really powerful lobbies are the anti-abortion lobby and, the Right to Life lobby, if you want to call it that, and then the National Rifle Association.
We have about 15 minutes left, and I want to spend some time using this AIPAC segue to talk about how the Israel lobby, in your experience and view, got such a deep toehold in American governmental politics.
It's a little bit what we were talking about earlier. If you build up your community to have a reputation as a voting bloc and a bloc that participates in politics, you can get a lot of power. AIPAC is made up of basically, it pretends to represent the Jewish community writ large, but of course it doesn't. There's other groups, like there's a much smaller lobbying group, but they try to do their best to counter AIPAC, called J Street. And certainly AIPAC doesn't represent progressive American Jews at all, who are against what's going on in Gaza and the genocide and Netanyahu in general. But AIPAC is very powerful, and it will even attack Jewish members of Congress who do not toe the line, and they'll defeat them. They're very brutal. And that's the only criteria they have. And it's really because the Jewish community came to America, some very early, from Portugal and Spain in the 1600s and 1700s, but mostly in the 1800s. So there's been a long time for the American Jewish community to build up as a recognized, powerful, successful community. By contrast, Arab Americans are a much smaller community numerically, and also came over much more as refugees and poor and not really woven together ethnically. And so because the Jewish Americans participate in all walks of life and are powerful and reached high levels of success, there's a lot of money available to AIPAC, and they spend it to defeat people who don't kowtow to Israel. And over time, it's become immensely powerful, mainly because of the amount of money, and they have a heck of an organization. I mean, every district has AIPAC people that keep an eye on the congressperson. They take them to Israel. There's trips paid for. One side is presented, and I know this because my husband was in Congress, and the members of Congress who get taken over there never hear the Palestinian side of anything. They don't see the apartheid. They're not taken. It's just unbelievable. So there's this entire phenomenally powerful organization that does its best to make sure that it has friends in Congress, and they succeed at it.
Would you give us a little bit of a window into your background in this sphere?
Yeah, my husband went to the Middle East in the late 70s and came back feeling very strongly that we had a very one-sided policy in the Middle East, and that he supported the legitimate defense concerns of Israel, but he did not support the expansion into occupied territories and the pushing out of Palestinians from their farms and villages and the obvious lack of resolution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And so I was with him, and I was on his staff at the time, and it interested me, and I went to the Middle East in the 80s twice, and I went to the occupied territories, and I was blown away by the apartheid. Jimmy Carter wrote a fabulous book on the whole thing called Peace, Not Apartheid, and it's shocking when you see how the Palestinians are made to live. And so that got me interested, and then when I when Pete left Congress and we moved back to California, I ended up being hired as a consultant to the Arab American Institute. And they hired me to go to different communities that had Arab Americans in enough numbers to sort of organize. And I would just do basic education stuff, like this is how politics works. This is what happens at your city level, your county level, your state level, your federal level. This is how you can start organizing. Start small, get somebody on the school board, integrate into your community, make friends, start communicating. And it was very challenging because typically immigrants to this country do not become politically involved until about the third generation, sometimes later. The first and second generations are trying just to get a toehold, get a roof over their head, and get their kid in school and figure it all out. So older ethnic groups like the Jewish Americans who've been here for much longer, that stuff's, ancient history. Actually, in California, the Asian American community took a really long time to get kind of going, maybe five generations. So when I was working with the Arab Americans, they were first and second generation, and they were really scared of putting their head up to be, shot at, metaphorically speaking. Also, people from the Middle East, they're not uniform. People call them the Arabs. Well, that's like saying the Europeans. It's stupid. A Frenchman is not a German. A German is not a Spaniard. They're very, very different. And the same is true in the Middle East. An Iraqi is not a Lebanese, and on and on. So I was working in communities where, sometimes they didn't have all that much in common with each other to start with. And here we are trying to make a presence in a political way. But, there were some successes.
Let's just talk about you for a second and the award that you won, the Outstanding Leadership Award. How did that come about? Were you nominated for that by someone in the community that you worked with at the Arab American Institute?
Yeah, that was actually an award I got from the National Association of Arab Americans. That was, I think, the earliest.
Oh, sorry, yes.
Yeah, that was the earliest group that kind of sought to get a presence in this country for that community. They have since kind of dissolved, and I think they're more merged into another group. I spoke a lot about what was going on in Palestine, and wrote a lot and signed on to a lot of letters, and there were efforts going on to highlight the plight of the Palestinian people and the inequality in the policies of the United States. We've never been a true intermediary in any sense of the word at all, ever. I mean, it's absurd to even think we ever were. We've only been one-sided.
After spending so many decades working with the Arab American community and seeing what's emerging now, the blowback that people are getting these days for speaking up for Palestinians and speaking out against genocide, can you share some wisdoms and some of your experience? Because I'm sure you must have gotten blowback from the work you were doing.
Oh, yes. And scary. Oh, there's so much to cover. It's such a big field, and it's so strange and deep. But, the effort of AIPAC has included making the word anti-Semitic only refer to the American Jewish community. Well, Semite refers to language, actually, and Arabs are Semitic people. But the word anti-Semitic only seems to pertain to Jewish Americans or Jews in general. So there's all kinds of efforts that have been made by AIPAC and its supporters to carve out a niche where free speech is not allowed. And that niche is the Israeli-Palestinian situation. And it's gotten worse rather than better. I mean, there are many members of Congress, Republicans, but even some Democrats, who are happy to criminalize speech against Israel's policies. And to criticize Israel is not to be anti-Semitic. And the danger of that tactic on their part is that people like me who've been in this field for decades get to the point where it's like, I don't care. Call me an anti-Semite. I'm not. But if you're using that to try and get me to shut up, I'm just going to disregard the insult and the smear, because that's all it is. There's an old saying in the law, if you have a good case, argue it on the facts. If you don't have a good case, attack your opponent personally. And that's what this is all about. There's not a leg to stand on in terms of many of Israel's policies and America's support of those policies. And since there's no factual basis to really have that stand, then smear your opponents and call them names and criminalize their speech. And that's an incredibly dangerous thing. And it's not just happening in that sphere. You see it in this administration. Anybody they don't like, they feel like they can imprison or bring charges against or indict. And we have to really push back against that.
What advice do you have for people who are afraid of the government right now?
Well, first of all, you're smart. And second of all, don't let them wear you down, and don't let them cow you, because that's how they win. They win when we become afraid and silent and hidden. I think that's where groups are good. You find like-minded groups that you have an affinity for that are doing the work and helping each other stay afloat mentally and emotionally, because doing it alone, I had a friend I had lunch with the other day, and she said, if I came across an ice age and I'd want to take one down and stuff, I'm like, don't even go there. It takes you out of the picture for no productive purpose. That's not the way to go about this. This is going to be much more where we link arms and recreate the movements that existed in the 60s and do the work and be brave.
Do you think at this point there's hope for a two-state solution?
No. I don't. And that's not to say there isn't hope for the Palestinians, but I can't give you a picture of what it looks like. I know many people in my field of work in this have long said that this two-state solution was never going to come about because Israel never went to that with any genuine intent. Although there were some wonderful men in Israel who did strongly support a two-state solution, and interestingly, a number of them were generals. But that generation is now gone. They have died off. One man, one vote, one woman, one vote, in one big confederation. I don't know what the picture is. The sad thing is that of all the Arab cultures, the Palestinians always struck me as by far the most democratic. They always had an interest in democracy. They voted for their leadership, and other Arab nations were scared of them for that reason. Yasser Arafat once told me that, this is way back, Israel was about number 3 on the list of countries that were trying to always suppress the Palestinians. The other 2 were Arab countries because they feared that the Palestinians' influence would spread to be people who wanted democracy, because they ran themselves in a democratic way.
So what's the alternative to democracy there?
I don't think there is an alternative to democracy.
Well, no, but when you're saying other Arab states were afraid of the Palestinian state.
They have royalty, and
Yes.
they have different structures. It's not to say they're not entirely undemocratic, but it's Israel itself is a parliamentary theocracy. It's not a democracy, not like ours is. And our democracy is weaker, in my opinion, than European democracies. We're a republic, and we don't directly elect our president. We have what you talked about earlier, the flaws of the Electoral College, which are nowadays a travesty and are really a result of compromises made at the Constitutional Convention because of slavery. So in a way, the Electoral College is a direct result of slavery. And, so we don't even have a direct democracy like European nations do.
What's behind all of this? Why is government so flawed? Why do people only thirst for power, Helen?
Because people are, why do some people have a conscience and some people don't have a conscience? Everybody should be equal under the law, but I've learned in my old age, not all people are equal, not in capability, not in conscience, not in heart, not in mind, not in spirit. We cover a big gamut, we humans, and some of it is really ugly, and we're seeing it now.
Do you still have ties to the Arab American activist community? People you work with, are you keeping up with lives over there in Palestine?
Yeah, and occasionally keep in touch with my old boss, and, I definitely keep in touch with what's going on, and it's just so heartbreaking. It's hard to sometimes get up in the morning. I understand people's despair because I feel it. One of Pete's favorite authors and judiciary minds was a guy named Oliver Wendell Holmes, and he had wonderful quotes, but one of them was, "We are all very near despair much of the time." which is true. We are. All those of us who think and feel, we feel despair. And then the challenge is to get up in the morning and say, I'm still going to do my part. I'm not going to let them beat me down. And that's what we touched on in our last talk, Jada, is this is all also part of a spiritual journey. We may never see a win. I have lost so many more elections that I've been involved with than I've won. But it's a bigger thing than that. It's a spirit thing. What do you stand for? And what do you want to look back at when you're lying in your deathbed? And I don't mean that in a lugubrious way, but when you're looking back at your life in that moment, what do you want to see that you did at every point where you had a choice to make?
Yeah. I can easily go down that path some days of what are my gifts? What's the world that I want to help create? And then this little creepy voice comes in and it's like, what makes you think you're more special than a Palestinian person? That you get to survive this?
Yeah, that's a trippy question. And that, again, gets into the whole spirit thing. You feel compassion for the horrors that the Palestinians are going through, which are beyond comprehension. But if you don't do what you can in your world, you're dishonoring them. You're dishonoring people who have less than you and can do less than you by not doing what you can do. You have the ability to do what you can do here that they don't have the ability to do where they're at. And if you don't use your gifts and your tools, you're dishonoring them. So you need to be you and do you to the best of your ability to help people who are not able to have the gifts and the abilities that you have.
And that includes just having a good time, singing some karaoke songs.
Hey, you know what? Absolutely. You've got to find your joy in all of this, because if you don't balance it with finding those moments of joy and beauty. I mean, I love bugs, as everybody knows, and walking around and finding weird little nests, and I mean, I love feeling awe, and every day I feel awe. And that is something that sustains me and helps me then do the things that are meaningful in the political and social sense. You got to balance it out. And that means you get to, take time off.
Yeah, right on. Thank you, Helen.
Thank you, Jada.
Another quick hour, honest and informed and compassionate.
Yeah, some of the stuff we touched on was kind of complex and tedious. But the main thing I want to tell people is just do what you can do. Food bank, community, vote.
Yeah. All right, y'all. We're going to talk with Helen again. This is not the end. It's only the beginning. We're going to keep going. In the Cab Radio is produced by Jada White, a.k.a. Dream Queen. Original theme music produced by Baby Weekend Boys and Icky Mac the Beat Jugular. Learn more at In the Cab Radio at Linktree. Thank you so much for tuning in.